You drive 3 hours on a Saturday morning. You bring a homemade pie, the same recipe your daughter used to beg you to make when she was 10. You knock on the door. Your grandkids run past you without looking up from their phones. And then your son-in-law glances over his shoulder and says, "Oh, we didn't know you were coming today." And just like that, standing in the doorway of your own child's home, you feel like a stranger. If that moment sounds familiar to you, I need you to stay with me today. Because what I'm about to share could change how you see yourself and how you allow others to treat you for the rest of your life. For over 40 years, I have worked as a family psychologist specializing in intergenerational relationships and elder emotional health. I've sat across from thousands of seniors just like you. Good people, loving parents, people who gave everything to their families. And too many of them come to me with the same quiet confession. My own children make me feel like I don't matter. Today I'm going to share with you 6 specific phrases. 6 things your adult children might say to you when you visit. And I need you to understand something very clearly. If you hear these phrases regularly, it is not a small thing. It is not just how kids talk these days. It is a pattern. And that pattern is slowly stealing your dignity. But here's what I also want you to know. Leaving does not make you a bad parent. Setting a boundary is not giving up on your family. It is the strongest thing you will ever do. Before we get into the 6 phrases, I want to put something on the table that nobody wants to talk about. According to the National Council on Aging, approximately 1 in 10 Americans aged 60 or older has experienced some form of elder abuse. But here's what the statistics don't capture: emotional abuse from adult children. It doesn't leave bruises. There's no police report. It happens behind closed doors, at dinner tables, in living rooms that you helped pay for. And because it comes from the people you love most, you make excuses for it. They're just stressed. They didn't mean it that way. Maybe I am being too sensitive. I've heard every version of those excuses. And I'll tell you what I tell every client who sits in my chair: love does not require you to accept disrespect. Not from a stranger, not from a coworker, and certainly not from your own children. Now, I want to be clear. This video is not about normal family disagreements. Every family argues. Every parent and adult child will bump heads sometimes. That's healthy. What I'm talking about today is a pattern. Repeated behavior designed, consciously or not, to make you feel small, unwelcome, or invisible. There's a difference between a bad day and a bad dynamic. Let's talk about the 6 phrases that reveal which one you're dealing with. Phrase number 1. We didn't ask you to come. I had a client. I'll call her Margaret. 72 years old. Retired school teacher. Drove 90 minutes every other Sunday to see her son and his family. She brought groceries. She helped with laundry. She played with her grandchildren on the floor, even though her knees ached for days afterward. One Sunday, she arrived during a small gathering her son was hosting for friends. She didn't know about it. And when she walked in, her son pulled her aside and said, quietly but firmly, "Mom, we didn't ask you to come. You can't just show up whenever you want." Margaret told me she didn't cry until she got back to her car. And then she sat in that driveway for 20 minutes because her hands were shaking too badly to drive. Here's what that phrase really does. When your child says, "We didn't ask you to come," they are erasing your place in the family. You are no longer a member of the household who is always welcome. You have been reclassified from family to visitor. And visitors need permission. Think about that. You changed this person's diapers. You walked the floor with them at 3 in the morning when they had a fever. And now you need an invitation to sit in their living room. This phrase is designed, intentionally or not, to make you feel like a burden. And once you start believing you're a burden, you stop showing up. You stop calling. You start disappearing from your own family. Not because you want to, but because the shame is unbearable. Here's what I want you to remember. You are not a burden. You are a parent. And any child who requires you to schedule your love like a business appointment has forgotten something fundamental about what family means. If you hear this phrase once, it might be a bad moment. If you hear it twice, it's a message. And if you hear it regularly, it is time to leave. Not in anger. In dignity. Phrase number 2. You always make everything about yourself. This one is a dagger. And it's effective because it puts you on the defensive immediately. Let me give you the typical scenario. You're visiting your daughter. She's telling you about a problem at work, maybe a conflict with her boss. And you say something like, "You know, something similar happened to me back in '94 when I was working at the plant. What I did was..." And before you can finish, she cuts you off. "Mom, this isn't about you. You always make everything about yourself." Now, is it possible that sometimes we share our own stories when we should be listening? Absolutely. That's a human thing, not a senior thing. But here's what you need to watch for: the pattern. In psychology, there's a concept called DARVO. It stands for deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. It's a manipulation tactic where the person who is actually being hurtful flips the script and makes you the problem. When "you always make everything about yourself" becomes the automatic response every time you express a feeling, share an opinion, or tell a story from your life, it's no longer feedback. It's a silencing tool. It trains you to stop talking, to stop sharing, to sit quietly and take up as little emotional space as possible. I had a gentleman in my practice, a retired firefighter, tough as nails, who told me he hadn't shared a personal story with his daughter in over 2 years. He said, "Every time I open my mouth about my life, she acts like I'm stealing the spotlight, so I just stop talking." That's not a father who makes everything about himself. That's a father who has been systematically silenced. If your child gives you genuine, loving feedback about listening better, that's healthy. But if every conversation becomes a courtroom where you're on trial for the crime of existing out loud, that is not feedback. That is control. And you deserve better. Phrase number 3. We don't need your advice. Times have changed. Let me say something that might surprise you. Your adult children absolutely have the right to make their own decisions. They have the right to parent differently than you did. They have the right to choose their own careers, their own lifestyles, their own values. That's not disrespect. That's growth. But there is a Grand Canyon-sized difference between "thanks, Mom, but we've decided to do it differently" and "we don't need your advice. Times have changed." The first one honors your input while asserting independence. The second one dismisses your entire life experience as obsolete. And that word, obsolete, is the hidden message behind this phrase. What your child is really saying is, "You are irrelevant. The world has moved past you. Your decades of experience, your hard-earned wisdom, your survival through things I can't even imagine, none of it matters. I want you to think about what you've lived through. Some of you survived the Vietnam era. You raised families on a single income when that was barely possible. You navigated recessions, job losses, health crises, all without Google, without YouTube, without a therapist on every corner. You figured it out. And you didn't just survive. You built lives. You built homes. You built the very people who are now telling you that your experience is worthless. The irony would be laughable if it didn't hurt so much. Now, here's how to tell the difference between healthy boundary setting and dismissal. Pay attention to 3 things: tone, context, and frequency. If your child says it gently, in a specific situation, once or twice, it's probably just them establishing autonomy. Normal. Healthy. But if it comes with an eye roll, if it's the default response to everything you say, if it's delivered in front of others to embarrass you, that's not autonomy. That's contempt. And contempt, according to decades of research by Dr. John Gottman, is the single greatest predictor of relationship destruction. Your wisdom has value. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Phrase number 4. You're being too sensitive. If there's one phrase that keeps me up at night, as a psychologist and as a human being, it's this one. You're being too sensitive. 4 words. And they are the textbook definition of gaslighting. For those of you who haven't heard that term, Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation where someone makes you question your own feelings, your memory, even your sanity. The term comes from a 1944 movie where a husband deliberately dims the gas lights in the house and then tells his wife she's imagining it. That's exactly what this phrase does. Your child says something hurtful. You express that it hurt. And instead of acknowledging your pain, they flip it back on you. You're being too sensitive. Translation: the problem isn't what I said. The problem is that you felt something about it. Let me tell you about Richard. 81 years old. Korean War veteran. Raised 4 children practically by himself after his wife passed. His youngest son had a habit of making jokes about Richard's hearing, his walking speed, his memory. Small jabs. The kind that sting but don't quite rise to the level of a fight. One Thanksgiving, Richard finally said, "Son, those jokes bother me. I'd appreciate it if you stopped." And his son laughed and said, "Come on, Dad. You're being way too sensitive. It's just jokes." Richard didn't bring it up again for 3 years. 3 years of silent meals. 3 years of swallowing small humiliations. Because his own son had convinced him that feeling hurt was a character flaw. This is especially dangerous for seniors. And I need you to hear me on this. As you age, people around you may already be questioning your sharpness, your memory, your emotional stability. When your own child adds to that doubt by calling you too sensitive, it plants a terrifying seed. Maybe I really am losing it. Maybe I can't trust my own feelings anymore. You can trust your feelings. If something hurts, it hurts. Your emotions are not a malfunction. They are information. And anyone who tries to convince you that your pain is imaginary is not protecting you. They are controlling you. Phrase number 5. If you don't like it, you don't have to come. This is the one that breaks my heart every single time I hear it. And I hear it far too often. On the surface, it sounds almost reasonable. It sounds like they're giving you a choice. But I need you to look deeper, because this is not a choice. This is an ultimatum disguised as an option. What your child is actually saying is, accept the way I treat you or lose access to me, my spouse, and your grandchildren. That's not freedom. That's emotional hostage-taking. I had a woman, I'll call her Dorothy, who told me through tears that her daughter said this to her after Dorothy asked politely if the family could eat dinner at the table instead of scattered across the house staring at screens. That's all she asked. A meal together. And her daughter snapped, "Mom, if you don't like how we do things here, you don't have to come." Dorothy didn't visit for 4 months. Not because she was angry, but because she was terrified. Terrified that if she pushed back even once more, she would lose her grandchildren entirely. And that right there, that fear, is exactly what makes this phrase so devastating for seniors. Because the number one fear among older adults isn't death. It isn't illness. It's isolation. It's being alone. And your adult children, whether they realize it or not, are weaponizing that fear when they say this. They know you'll do almost anything to maintain access. So they use that leverage to ensure you never challenge them, never set a boundary, never express a need that inconveniences them. But I need you to ask yourself something. What kind of relationship are you actually maintaining? If the price of being in your grandchildren's lives is your silence, your dignity, and your self-respect, is that a relationship? Or is it a prison with a welcome mat? You did not raise your children so that one day they could hold your love for their children ransom. And if they cannot treat you with basic decency during a visit, then yes, you leave. Not because you don't love them. Because you love yourself enough to stop bleeding for people who won't even hand you a bandage. Phrase number 6. We'll handle your care when the time comes. This is the phrase that people overlook. It doesn't sound mean. It doesn't sound aggressive. In fact, it might even sound caring, like they're planning ahead, being responsible. But pay attention to the context. Because when this phrase is said in front of you, about you, as if you're not even in the room, it is one of the most dehumanizing things your child can do. I remember sitting in a session with a couple in their 40s and the husband's 84-year-old father. The son turned to his wife, right in front of his dad, and said, "We'll figure out what to do with Dad when the time comes. Maybe that place on Oak Street, I don't know." His father was sitting 3 feet away, fully lucid, sharp as a tack, and his son was discussing his future like he was planning what to do with old furniture. I watched the father's face when it happened. He didn't say a word. He just shrank, like something inside him quietly folded up and went away. That moment has stayed with me for 15 years. Here's the psychology. When someone talks about you in your presence as though you're not there, they are practicing what we call depersonalization, treating a living, thinking, feeling human being as an object to be managed. And when it comes from your own child, it sends a very specific message. Your voice no longer matters in decisions about your own life. This phrase is particularly dangerous because it's a preview of what's coming. If your child already talks about your care in front of you without including you, without asking what you want, where you want to live, how you want your final years to look, then you are already being edited out of your own story. Your care is your decision. Your future is your conversation. And if your children are making plans for you without you, it is time to sit them down and say, very clearly, "Nothing about me happens without me." And if they can't respect that, you have your answer. Now, I know some of you are sitting there right now with a heavy heart. Maybe you recognized one of these phrases. Maybe you recognized all 6. And you're wondering, what do I actually do? I'm going to give you 5 concrete steps. Not theory. Not wishful thinking. Practical steps you can begin today. Step 1. Identify the pattern, not the incident. One bad comment on a stressful day is human. A repeated pattern across months and years is something else entirely. Start paying attention. If it helps, keep a small notebook. Write down what was said, when, and how it made you feel. Patterns become undeniable when you see them on paper. Step 2. The 24-hour rule. When one of these phrases hits you, do not react in the moment. Your emotions are valid, but your response will be more powerful if it's deliberate, not reactive. Leave. Go home. Give yourself 24 hours to process. Then decide your next move from a position of clarity, not pain. Step 3. Write your boundaries down. This is crucial. Take a piece of paper and write down what you will and will not accept. Be specific. I will not accept being spoken to with contempt. I will not accept being discussed as though I am not present. I will not accept being told my feelings are invalid. When it's written down, it becomes real. It becomes a contract with yourself. Step 4. Have the conversation, once. Choose a calm moment. Not during a holiday. Not in front of others. Sit your child down and say something like, "I love you. I will always love you. But I need you to know that certain things you say to me are causing real harm. Here is what I need to change." Then share your boundaries. Say it once, clearly, with love but without apology. You are not asking for permission to be treated with respect. You are informing them of the requirement. If they hear you, wonderful. If they dismiss you, mock you, or gaslight you again, then they have given you your answer. Step 5. Build your chosen family. This is the step that scares people the most, and it's the most important one. If your biological family cannot treat you with dignity, you need to build a circle that can. Join a community group. Attend a church or social club. Volunteer. Find people who see you, really see you, and value your presence. You are not too old to make new connections. You are not too old to be appreciated. And you absolutely are not too old to be loved well. Family is not just blood. Family is whoever shows up and treats you like you matter. I want to close this video by speaking directly to you, not as a psychologist, just as someone who has spent a lifetime watching good people accept bad treatment because they confused love with obedience. I know this is hard. I know that everything in you wants to keep the peace, to hold the family together, to not be that parent who causes drama. I know you lie awake at night wondering if it's your fault. Wondering if you did something wrong 30 years ago that explains why your child treats you this way now. Let me tell you something with 40 years of certainty. It is not your fault. You are not the problem. And the fact that you're still showing up, still trying, still loving them despite everything, that doesn't make you weak. That makes you one of the strongest people I've ever known. But strength without boundaries is just suffering with extra steps. You did not spend 60, 70, 80 years on this earth, surviving everything life threw at you, just to sit quietly in someone's living room while they make you feel invisible. You matter. Your feelings matter. Your presence in this world matters. And if your own children can't see that, then it's time to stand up, walk out that door, and go find the people who can. Because the final chapter of your life should not be written by someone else's cruelty. It should be written by your courage. Thank you for watching. If this video touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you've experienced any of these phrases, leave a comment below. You are not alone. This community, the strong elderly life family, we see you. And we're here. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, stay strong. You've earned it.